Switchblade Sisters. This is one of those movies that caught my eye on TV. It was somehow being shown on HBO, and after watching it, I can't figure out why. This is one of those movies where you'll ask the classic question, what the hell did I just watch? Let me just say this right now, that way you're not too surprised by some of the other choices on this list. The 70s was the decade of a lot of exploitation films, and it seemed to be like a never-ending thing with that decade. This abomination just happens to be one of them, about a female gang called the Jezebels who are out to seek revenge on a male gang called the Crabs. I wasn't raised in the 70s, but even then, I don't think any gang wants to be known as the Crabs. Okay, I will give credit to where credit is due. They did make this film on a low budget of $320,000. But Halloween was made on that budget too, and that's a classic. So what's this film's excuse? It's poorly acted, poorly shot, and the story, despite its best efforts, or worse depending on how it looks, it's complete garbage. I've seen real-life female gangs and I've heard stories about what they were like years back, and they're nothing like what they are in the film, and the director, Jack Hill, said he did his research. He's either lying or they lied to him. This film is actually recommended by Quentin Tarantino. So, Tarantino, as much as I love your work, you go down a couple notches in my book. Number 9. Tommy. A movie based on The Who's rock opera album of the same name. This has got to be the biggest stoner film that I've ever seen in my life. Literally, there is no way this was made by somebody who was thinking clearly. They had to be on some sort of drug or something, and this is the 70s, so I wouldn't be the least bit surprised. I literally felt like I was on drugs after watching the film because it's so unevenly shot and the lighting changes so sporadically that my eyes had trouble adjusting. And I was watching it on a 50-inch TV. I can't imagine what it looked like in movie theaters. Of course, I didn't expect anything different, especially with Ken Russell as the director. Russell, God rest his soul, was famous for his flamboyant and rather bizarre film style, and as much as I tried, I could never get into his work. I felt it lacked consistency, and nowhere is that more obvious than Tommy. The sad part is that it has a great cast of both actors and musicians. Roger Daltrey, Anne Margaret, Elton John, Jack Nicholson. No lie, Jack Nicholson is in this musical. So overall, this is a film where I'm convinced that you have to be stoned to understand what the hell's going on. Number 8. The Exorcist 2. Even in the 70s they were releasing pointless horror sequels. What the hell? How in the world does this film exist? The film could not be any more polar opposite to the original. It's not scary, creepy, or the least bit coherent. It's just dully written and sadly very poorly acted. And that's sad when the first film was often remembered for its incredible performances. You can tell right off the bat, from the beginning, that the writers clearly did not know how to continue this story. They literally erased the happy ending of the original and just found a cheap way to bring the demon back into the story. You know, the classic Hollywood horror sequel twist that rarely to never works, but they seem to constantly reuse over and over and over for every single horror sequel despite it not working most of the time. The film also sometimes goes into sci-fi territory. It's completely ridiculous. There might have been some level of forgiveness if this film had managed to stay a little bit closer to the original, but no, they don't even bother to do that. Number 7. Star Trek: The Motion Picture. The original Star Trek television series. It's a classic series that has gone down in history as one of the best sci-fi television shows of all time. However, its success really didn't show until it went into syndication after its cancellation, and Hollywood wanted to capitalize on that success with a feature-length film, and it released in 1979. How could it have been any better? It's one of the greatest shows of all time, and now it's on the big screen with all of the original cast members. All the hype and excitement led to one of the most boring movies in history. Seriously, this has to be one of the biggest disappointments in movie history. One of the first major flaws of the movie is that it's way too simple for a feature-length film. They obviously wanted to write it like the show, but the problem is, while this plot might have been perfect for a half-hour show, it doesn't quite work for a 2-hour movie. Also, shots take way too long. It's almost like the creators were really impressed with the effects, so they had to keep the shots going longer and longer and longer. I could complain about this all day. If you want to know more, I recommend watching the Nostalgia Critics review of it. It's a really good review. So overall, to sum up the whole experience, it's boring. Number 6. Jaws 2. I know the sequel has its share of fans, but it doesn't change my opinion of it. I think it's just another horrible horror sequel that shouldn't exist. The first Jaws is a classic. It is one of many movies that I unfortunately didn't include in my top 10 best list. However, I never liked the sequel because I felt it was just more of the same. To me, all Jaws 2 proved was that there really wasn't much they could do with a story about a killer shark. And to be quite honest, the more I saw the shark in this film, the less scary he became. In fact, the shark almost becomes comedic after a while, which I'm sure wasn't the intentions of the creators, but that's how it comes off to me. There's really not much more to say about it. To me, it's just a pointless sequel to a movie that didn't need a sequel, period. Number 5. I Spit on Your Grave. This movie is just disgusting and brainless. It's a rape and revenge tale about a woman who is gang raped several times by a group of men, and then when she is healed, she seeks revenge on all of them. This is the type of story that would fit right into today's Lifetime network. I can understand the concept, but the rape scene is so long and disturbing that I could never sit through the entire film. Also, it's not much of a revenge story. The revenge is actually pretty darn short when compared to the overblown rape scene. The sad part is that it's not poorly acted. Camille Keaton gives a splendid performance, and I'm sure the story sounded good on paper, but the problem is the abuse and violence is so big that it blocks out the story entirely. After it's all over, you'll either turn it off in disgust or you'll just get up and walk away. Somehow they actually managed to remake this movie in 2010, produced by the same man who directed the original, and guess what? It suffered the same fate. Number 4. Killer Nun. Yeah, this film's title just reeks of classic, doesn't it? You can't get much more straightforward with a film name than Killer Nun. This film was actually sent to me by a friend, and it's just weird. It's about some nun who goes on a rampage after having surgery. Like most nunsploitation films, it involves a lesbian affair of some sort. Is that like on the to-do list with movies like this? This movie is just way too out there and makes no sense whatsoever. I've only sat through the movie once, and I'm never sitting through it again. The acting is lousy, the story is unconvincing, and doesn't even try to be convincing, and like most nunsploitation movies, it blurs the line between movie and soft porn. Number 3. The Black Godfather. Good lord, another exploitation movie. This time, blaxploitation. Geez, what was with the 70s? Literally, how many exploitation films could they possibly make? There's Killer Nuns, The Nun and the Devil, Blackula, Blackenstein, and of course, The Black Godfather was the latest in this trend at the time. All you have to do is read the title and then check out its movie poster to see what movie it's really ripping off. However, where The Godfather followed the Italian mafia scene and its extorting business philosophy, The Black Godfather talks about the black mafia and drug dealing. If this had been labeled a parody, I would have forgiven it a heck of a lot faster, but that definitely wasn't the case. It's actually a story that takes itself way too seriously, and that makes it far worse. So overall, I don't get it with the exploitation films. They rarely ever work, and yet, even to this day, they keep trying it, and The Black Godfather is just another awful effort. Number 2. Caligula. This movie is based on the rise and fall of the third Roman Emperor Caligula, and it's one of those films that looks like half movie and half porn. Literally, the film is way too explicit in areas. The really sad part about this film is that it seemed like a valid concept. Again, it's based on the rise and fall of Caligula, and that alone should have been a great dramatic story. But instead, they went for crappy costume designs, horrible directing, and pretty shallow acting. Poor Malcolm McDowell, he actually is a great actor, but the poor guy has the worst luck when it comes to roles. Fortunately, he's like the only actor who's trying to give a good performance here, but it's not enough to save the film. The film has garnered a cult following, but it's unfortunately for all the wrong reasons. And number 1. Moment by Moment. John Travolta was literally coming off of both Grease and Saturday Night Fever, and it seemed like he would be a true box office draw. And then this hunk of crap came out and proved that having a couple hit movies doesn't quite mean that you're always going to have a hit on your hands. It's pretty much the story about a young drifter who falls in love with an older rich woman, and that's about it. And even for a story that simple, they still couldn't do it right. John Travolta, despite his success in music and dance films, still didn't quite have the acting chops to pull off a dramatic role, and that shows big time here. Well, all you have to really do is watch his speaking scenes in Grease and his role in Carrie to see that he hadn't quite gotten the whole acting thing down by that point in time. Either way, bad acting or not, the story is horribly told. I don't feel a thing for these characters, and the dialogue is tremendously bad. To make matters worse, Jane Wagner gets very lazy with the direction of the film. The film was so bad that it has never been released on DVD. I've only run into this film once on television and managed to actually watch the whole thing, which is how it ended up on this list. So that's the top 10 best and worst films of the 1970s. One decade is down, and next time I take a look at the 1980s. Well, everyone, that's it for now. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.